Let's bring you update from UNGA AT. The U.S. President Donald Trump has addressed the session at the ongoing assembly, where he lashed out at the international organization, questioning its purpose and calling it a failure. He also criticized world leaders for recognizing Palestine state and others for allowing migrants into their countries. He gave an outline of America's achievements under his administration.
By accelerating action in energy, forests, methane and industrial decarbonization, by defining a credible roadmap to mobilize $1.3 trillion annually in climate finance by 2035 for developing countries.
For being here, and Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, First Lady of the United States, distinguished delegates, ambassadors, and world leaders. 6 years have passed since I last stood in this grand hall and addressed a world that was prosperous and at peace in my first term. Since that day, the guns of war have shattered the peace I forged on 2 continents. An era of calm and stability gave way to one of the great crises of our time. And here in the United States, 4 years.
My colleague Berned Akede is at the UN General Assembly session in New York. He joins me now alongside an international journalist, Adeniyi Kunnu, to discuss what went down today, especially the address by President Donald Trump. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Berned, I'll start with you. Run us through quickly events of day 2, touching on Trump's address and other issues affecting Africa.
All right, thank you for having me. First of all, I'd like to do explain some housekeeping rules that I'm going by where I am, just in case anything changes. So I'm at the entrance where presidents and heads of government will be passing through, and we've gotten to see a couple of them go in and out. However, I've been instructed to stop this live broadcast if eventually any of them comes this way and is speaking to members of the press. So should that happen, please permit me. Going back to your question, Felicity, of course, like you did mention, I think one of the biggest things that have happened today is the address by, I would say, our chief host, who is the President of the United States, President Donald Trump, who in certain ways lashed out at the United Nations body itself, stating that the organization has failed in so many ways. President Donald Trump also talked about migration and immigration, talking about the United Nations aiding migration, and we know his stance based on several policies that he's pushed forward since regaining office for his second term, talking about migration, particularly into the United States. He also did point accusing fingers or fault several European countries, and well, generally countries that have decided to recognize the Palestinian state, amongst other things that he actually did mention earlier today, and that has actually sparked some kind of reactions, not just here, but I want to think across the world. But moving away from that and coming to Africa, we did have President Cyril Ramaphosa who spoke not too long ago here, and he made some very key points. 8 of them I jotted down, and I would quickly run through them without wasting time. Now, first of all, President Ramaphosa talked about the advantage of South Africa hosting the G20 summit later this year, which is one. He also talked about debt stifling, I beg your pardon, and the ability of African countries not to be able to follow up with SDGs because they have to service debts. 3, he talked about using trade as a strength and not to stifle African countries. Number 4, he talked about lifting embargoes in countries like Cuba, seeing how those kind of trade and economic embargoes have affected Cuba. Very quickly, number 5, he talked about the world and the wars that are being fought around the world, and how the United Nations and other countries of the world, rather than building building structures that will take out poverty, we're building weapons that are destroying the world. Very quickly, President Ramaphosa also hammered on the Security Council and saying that it has proven to be ineffective in carrying out its duties, basically for accountability, and that there are certain countries that are not responding to dictates of the Security Council. And then the final 2 points I jotted down, he He emphatically said that the world should see towards the ending of the genocide in Gaza. And finally, of course, like almost every African president will talk about, he said that Africa should have a permanent seat at the Security Council. And then, to piggyback on that, we equally had Nigeria's foreign minister, Alhaji Tuga Metama, who passed by here and spoke to News Central directly, talking about Africa having a permanent seat at the Security Council. When I asked him, he said, yes, it's long overdue. And then I asked him, which African countries do you think should have a seat? He said Nigeria, first of all, and then anybody else. That's a brief highlight of some of the things, interesting things, if you like, that we have, taken down here while at the UN General Assembly.
Thank you very much for the update, despite the constraints around you. We'll let you go now so you can continue the coverage, and we'll come back to you much later. All right, let's go now to Adeniyi Kunnu. First off, Trump started with, he went off script. He criticized the UN. He gave a lecture on migration and what the world is doing wrong. And all of the shenanigans he brought up that Berned just highlighted. What is your thoughts about the content and the manner of speech? He exceeded the 15 minutes mark that was given. What is your overall view of Trump's speech at the UN Assembly?
Well, it is very evident that the necessary units within the United Nations need to reinvent themselves and be able to show that every country has equal or near equal respect when they come to such 193 nation assembly to speak on behalf of their respective countries or those other aligned countries on pertinent issues. But I need you to understand also that when the United Nations was birthed in 1945, there were certain things that happened basically after the Second World War. And you may want to take it away. The United Nations has a level of bragging rights because of its being a founding member of the United Nations and the role it played when it comes to intervening and the subsequent end of the Second World War, as well as the liberation of many African countries. So the United States of America understands its position and history when it comes to the foundation and the continuation of funding for the United Nations and many missions around the world. So having said that, I think that for every organization, global organizations, there has to be what I call reinvention of self and evolution through the phases. The Second World War had ended, and if you look at it, 1945 to this time, you're talking most definitely about a significant number of years, very well over 70 years since the Second World War ended. What has the UN done with regard to many of the African countries that have now come out of the bondage of colonialism, such that it has been speaking as one? Let me say this. You cannot have a global body as the United Nations such that when it comes to certain issues, it speaks from one side of its mouth, and when it comes to some other issues, it speaks from the other side of its mouth. The Ukraine issue that appears to be as if President Donald Trump is supporting Russia has a history. So people just want to clip the history on its head. Nobody wants to talk about when Viktor Yanukovych was there as the leader of Ukraine. Now you're talking about migration around the world. If you do a proper check, since the 9/11 and the infiltration of terrorist groups into respective organizations or respective countries across the world, most of all of these people, according to documented history, shows that some of them have benefited from certain countries and have turned against those countries and have become terrorists. And that has resulted in a lot of the cataclysm that we found as far as terrorism is concerned in the country. If you look at Nigeria as a case in point, my country of birth that has been talking about being, occupying a permanent seat at the United Nations General Assembly, how could you, for instance, be asking to be the one that occupies that seat when your government will sit with armed terrorists? It never happens. It's a disgrace. And by virtue of that, let me also say this for the records. Egypt has the oldest and the highest spending military on the African continent. So when people are talking about Nigeria occupying permanent member seats at the United Nations Security Council, I tell them, hold your breath. What Egypt spends on defense, you can have like 4 or 5 of it from what Nigeria spends. So in the first place, you have to understand that despite the fact that we are more in population, the Egyptian army is more fortified, with more expenses, with more ammunition. So let's understand that. What is a weapon building capacity? A country that is still struggling to have electricity, what weaponry can we say was built by Nigeria? Nobody hands over a Security Council position to an unserious country. And that is why when we're even talking about GDP, nominal or whatever, Egypt is still first with well over $347 billion. South Africa over $400 billion. Nigeria is about $320 billion. So let's understand that at times it is easy to play on the sentiment of wanting to occupy certain positions. But when we look at the facts and figures and the reality of our situation, many local governments in my own dear country of birth, Nigeria, is occupied by terrorists, yet the government still feels comfortable negotiating with non-state actors. You can't find that in serious countries. You can't find that in countries that are really ready to deal with the enemies, the non-state actors that are making the country unlivable. What is the nature of the technology we have deployed just to be able to identify where people are who are making consistent conversations with terrorists and are cashing home? We have not dealt with the basics of security in Nigeria, and we're talking about permanent seats. These are the things that are considered. A country should be able to feed itself. A country should have consistent electricity. A country should have a level of capacity in terms of defense, capacity built to deal with the enemies of the country. From within, what are our capacities? The killings in the Middle Belt have continued consistently. So you're talking about the United States of America. I have to tie it back to home because that is where the relevance is. So for President Donald Trump, he has considered all of these things I've mentioned among the people in Europe who at the moment are beginning to face the tidal wave of insurgency. Let me tell you this.
Adeniyi, I could listen to you go on, but we are time constrained because you're making really valid points. Let's take on one particular issue that a lot of persons have also said his comments. He addressed the issue of illegal migration at this session,
yes,
and accused countries of trading their legacies. How do you think, I mean, the leaders there, the most that we heard of a reaction was when he talked about his encounter with Lula da Silva. How is the international community likely to respond to Trump's criticism with regards to migration? If you can keep this within 1 minute, that would be great, please.
Let me say this, migration is as old as time, and many countries of the world will never be strengthened enough the way they are today unless migration has taken place. The Second World War was essentially won for the United Kingdom as part of the alliance because over 2.3 million Indian people, Indian army, fought and got killed in that Second World War. Where's the documentation? We have the facts and figures here. So when you're talking about migration, migration will remain important as long as the world stands. But what we have to address is to ensure that people migrating from somewhere to the other places have their proper checks done and are not allowing, I'm talking about countries, people who will come and destroy their countries. I'm telling you this, anybody who moves from one country to the other must understand that although there are rights and privileges, but you have to also respect what that country stands for. Illegal migration, yes, is not what any country would like. And I need to say this, that Donald Trump, as the president, has the right to speak for his country the way he wants to. Let other presidents go to the same podium that they have the opportunity to and speak very strongly about what they want or what they don't want for their country. When we dwell on what he's saying it on behalf of Americans. He's saying it on behalf of his country. Anybody that takes the podium should not be able to cry. When you go there, also say that we are going to deny people visas, we are going to do this. If everybody begins to consider security, the future of their country, they will definitely know that you have to be able to speak strongly on such global platform for your own country. The people that are speaking for Nigeria, what are they saying there? What are they talking about? That's important, my dear. That's important.
Adeniyi, we have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for speaking with us. We appreciate your time as always.